Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. I would like to tell you about 6 books that I have read recently, and there was some really interesting ones in here. I really enjoyed these books. And so the first one I want to talk about is Echoes of Lies by Jo Bannister. This is a book that was initially published in 2001. This is a reread for me, but it's been probably 10 years since I read this book. But I've been trying to find it ever since then, and the problem was that I couldn't remember the name of the author and I couldn't remember the name of the book, but the book stuck with me, and that's pretty rare for mysteries. I tend to really forget what I'm reading, and that allows me to reread mysteries, which I really love to do. But this one stuck with me because it had such a fascinating premise, and the issues that it brought up were so interesting. So the main character in this book is Brodie Farrell, and Brodie runs a business called Looking for Something, and she finds things for people. She finds antiques or race horses or lost things. Like, she just kind of finds things. She's really good at that. And one day she gets approached to find a man called Daniel Hood, and all they have to go on is a photograph. They don't have any phone number or address or anything, and it's a really blurry, pixelated photograph. And the woman who has come to her goes through this big long story about how he kind of was a con man and stole all kinds of money from her, and they need to find him to get her money back. And so Brodie takes the case, and she pretty easily finds Daniel Hood. And a couple of days later, she is horrified to read in the newspaper that Daniel was kidnapped and tortured and killed. And she is just absolutely horrified that her actions led to that result. And so she goes to see the police to let them know what had happened to her. And she discovers that Daniel is not dead. He was left for dead, but they managed to save him, and the police are allowing the newspapers to say that he died in order to protect him. And so she then, and with Daniel, once Daniel wakes up and recovers, are kind of go into looking into what happened to him. And so it was just so very fascinating, because Daniel does not understand why he was taken, why he was tortured. He doesn't understand any of it. And it led to such a fascinating story. And what I loved and what stuck with me were the reactions of people in this book to what happened. Daniel is a 26-year-old math teacher in their town. They live in a coastal town on the south coast of England, and this book is all about forgiveness and confession and absolution and trauma and truth and regret and blame and vengeance and revenge and conscience and justification. It brought up so many interesting themes. The other thing that was so fascinating about this book is, and it led to this huge discussion I had about it with my husband as I was trying to work it out in my head, kind of what I thought about this book, is that Bannister is flipping the script in this book. Daniel is in the story by coincidence, but he continues on almost as the main character, even though he's not the main character. The ones that you should have compassion or sympathy for aren't the ones that you have compassion or sympathy for. It's a mystery, but the mystery is not at all what you think it is. And so it's just so fascinating. And so near the beginning, when Brodie realizes that she played a part in what happened to Daniel, she goes to see him in the hospital. He's still unconscious, but her a friend of hers told her, you need to go and confess. Whether he hears you or not isn't the issue. It's for your own personal state that you need to go and confess to him. And so she does. And so I love this one paragraph. Brodie buried her face in her hands. Now she understood. This was what Marta had sent her here for. The agony of confession, the relief of absolution, catharsis. It opened a door on the past, made it possible to open one on the future. And then even a little earlier, there was such a fascinating line as Brodie is really trying to work through her responsibility in what happened, how she should feel, how she should react afterwards. And in speaking to Daniel while he's still in the hospital, she ends up starting to sort of hope that he had done something to deserve what happened to him. So she says, she's thinking this, but while any possibility remained that a genuine grievance lay behind the atrocity that Daniel Hood had in some measure contributed to his own tragedy, Brodie would not entirely give up hope. If he was only a little guilty, then she was a little less so. So it was just so fascinating, and I think I need to say this isn't a violent book. You don't you're not there when a lot of the violence happens. You find out about it, but it's not a descriptive book or an overly violent book. But it was such a fascinating read. I really enjoyed it. All right, that was a long discussion for just one of the books. Then I was continuing on in the mobile library series by Ian Sansom, and I read The Delegates Choice. This is the third book in the series, and in this book, Israel and Ted head to England with their mobile library, and they go to what's called a mobile meet, and it's for other mobile librarians, and it's just kind of a chance for them to gather and discuss business and kind of look at each other's vans, and there's some competition and stuff. And so of course for Israel, this is a chance for him to go home, to see his family, to see his girlfriend, and to just, you know, have a little bit of a break. I love this series. I find it really funny, in kind of a sad sort of way. But I love this quote on here at the front. This is from The Guardian, but it's a perfect antidote to melancholy. And it is, like, it's so funny. So he's been in Northern Ireland, the north of Northern Ireland, as they say, for about 8 months. And he still feels so much like a fish out of water. And it's just so good. The bantering between him and Ted is hilarious. And then, of course, they park the van near his mother's house, which is where they're staying while they're in London. And, of course, the van gets stolen overnight. And the majority of this book is him and Ted looking for their van. And it is just really entertaining. I also read, and this one is a historical fiction. This is Rose of York, Fall from Grace by Sandra Worth. This is the last in her trilogy about Richard III, and it's really interesting. She takes a distinct position regarding Richard III, and this is a historical fiction full of historical detail, and yet it is personal. It is a deeply personal look at Richard and his relationships with those close to him, and how he feels about now having the crown. The book opens on his coronation day and goes until he dies in Bosworth. Where does he? I've already forgotten. I shouldn't forget. But anyway, so it's such an interesting time period in England, and so it's a great historical fiction, and there is a lot of historical stuff in here, but it really is a personal portrait of Richard. So if you like historical fiction that is more of a character study, then you may really enjoy this trilogy, and especially this third book in the trilogy. And then I did another reread, and this is Slow Horses by Mick Herron. There's a new book coming out in this series that I'm looking forward to, but I thought I wanted to go back and read this series from the beginning again. It's a really entertaining series, and the best way to describe it is to just read this part in the synopsis. Let us be clear about this much at least. Slough House is not in Slough, nor is it a house. Slough House is Jackson Lamb's kingdom, a dumping ground for members of the intelligence service who've screwed up, left a secret file on a train, blown a surveillance, or become drunkenly unreliable. They're the service's poor relations, the slow horses. And so it's set at Slough House, and the main character in this book is River Cartwright, who is relatively new to Slough House and desperately wants to get back in the good books and move back over to Regent's Park, which is where kind of those who are in good with the bosses work from Regent's Park. So it's a story about the intelligence services, is a story about MI5, but what I like about it, so it's basically a spy thriller, but it's really so much about the internal politics of MI5. There is so much about ambition and reputation and stabbing each other in the back. It's really very entertaining. And so they discover in this particular one in the series, they discover there's a video that's gone up and someone's been kidnapped, and the people who took him are saying that they will cut his head off live on the internet in 48 hours. And so the people of Slough House decide that they want to get involved in figuring out what's going on, because it can only be to their good to do that. And so it's great because, you know, there is all of the stuff involved with, you know, an operation, let's say, with MI5, but it really is so much about the internal structure, and it's fascinating. They're so good. And there was this one quote here that I thought I loved. It was so hilarious. So one of the slow horses, as it were, is sitting. He's out and about on the high street, and he notices the shops opposite were a high street palindrome: Korean grocery, courier service, letting agents, courier service, Korean groceries, and buses passed with noisy frequency. I just love that, a high street palindrome. All right, and then I read The Pigeon Pie Mystery by Julia Stuart, and I loved this. It was so good. This is a historical mystery set in the late Victorian era, 1898, and it is delightful. It is funny and charming and full of quirky characters. The main character is Princess Alexandrina, nicknamed Mick. Her father is the exiled Maharaja of Prindar in India. She is born and grew up in England. Her father is a Maharaja, and her mother is an English woman, and her maid Pookie. And when the story opens, her father has passed away, and in order to pay off his debts, the home that she's been living in has to be sold, and the Queen offers her a grace and favor house at Hampton Court Palace. And so I just loved the setting of this. The setting of Hampton Court Palace in the late 1800s was so fascinating. The people who lived there, who also had grace and favor houses or apartments, the people who worked there was the keeper of the maze and the keeper of the vine, the chamberlain, the housekeeper, and then of course the palace is open to the public, and so you get all the public coming through as well. It was just so fascinating. So one of the residents, General Bagshot, dies after eating a pigeon pie that Pookie has made. And so Mink gets herself involved in investigating in order to clear her maid's name. I wanted to show you, there's this great map of Hampton Court Palace at the beginning, And the opening line of this book made me laugh out loud. As the hail bounced on the carriage roof, Mick suddenly wondered whether she ought to buy mourning knickers. And this was just delightful. I loved it. I loved what I learned about Hampton Court Palace. I loved what I learned about so many things in the late 1800s about what mourning was like and how funerals were run. Like, it was so interesting and so entertaining. I highly recommend this. If you're looking for a Victorian historical mystery, then I recommend you check this one out. And then finally, I read Essex Poison by Ian Sansom. This is the fourth in his County Guides mystery. These are set in 1937, and the main character is Stephen Sefton, who is mid-20s and has gotten a job as an assistant to Professor Morley, who wants to write a guide to each county in England before the landscape and stuff kind of changes irrevocably. And along on their journeys is his daughter Miriam. And these are just really interesting stories. I love what you learn about each county as you go. And so in Essex Poison, they are there. They've been invited. Morley is invited as an honorary guest at the Colchester Oyster Festival. And then the mayor dies after eating oysters at the festival, and of course Morley gets himself involved investigating. I loved that there was mention of Marguerite Allingham and Dorothy L. Sayers, and then a brief mention of Agatha Christie in here too. And so yeah, these are just a really interesting kind of slice of life in a really specific period of time about a really specific place, and that's why I enjoy this series anyway. So this is what I've been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.